Welcome to Watch Symposium. I'm Austin. All right, a paid question for Paul T. He writes, Austin, I have a question I'd like you to make a video on. Polished watches. How can you tell a watch is polished, and does it lower the value? Should we stay away from them or just be aware to make a knowledgeable purchasing decision? Is it worth paying less for a polished watch? All right, so I'm going to go through his questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my philosophy on polishing. All right, so first of all, let me just say that I don't think polishing gets brought up enough in YouTube videos. I was educated through Archie Luxury. When I first got into watches, I listened to his advice, and he really did steer me in the right direction in terms of what I should buy. But one thing I think he sort of failed me on is he never brought up the idea of polishing. And so I was on my third Rolex before the idea of polishing sort of came into consciousness. And I wish I had known about it earlier, because polishing, third-party polishes through RSC, what it means to have a non-polished piece versus a polished piece. I mean, those are things that I didn't appreciate, and I think they're really important. I think it's probably one of the most important things to think about when you're buying a vintage watch, and so I think more people need to think about it. That's one of the reasons why I bring up polishing. Now, I think when it comes to your average watch person, they fall on a continuum. All right. And on one side, you have fussy, difficult, persnickety. All right. Collectors. All right. And then on the other side, you have the casual person, the casual watch lover. Well, Archie is all the way over on that casual side. I mean, polished watches, he's not worried about that. If it looks good, it is good. All right. And, third-party polishes, not a problem. All right. I think maybe that comes from the fact that a lot of pieces come into his collection for a little while and then they leave. And if they need a polish while they're in his steed, then he goes the cheaper route, because it's going to mean he's going to flip it for a little bit more money. All right. I approach things from that sort of persnickety, difficult, fussy perspective, because I purchase my pieces for life and I want the best pieces possible. And so for that reason, I mean, you gotta think of sort of levels. Top is new, all right. Then you got new old stock, and then you got what I consider, what I look for is a nice non-polished piece, and then you've got sort of a beat up piece but non-polished, and then you've got polished pieces. And you can't go back. You can't go to new old stock. You can't once a piece is polished, it can't go to it just can't go back up. So as far as that sort of range, I want new or new old stock. Not going to happen if you're talking vintage pieces, but any watch can be made to look new from a distance by polishing, and so that's why I'm not keen on it. All right, and so let's go through Paul's questions. All right, so he says, how can you tell a watch is polished? All right, so first of all, you need to think about which watch are you focusing on. For me, it's 5-digit steel professional Rolexes. All right, GMTs, Submariners, Explorer 2s, and the cases of those watches are pretty similar. So it's a transferable skill whether you're looking at an Explorer 2 or a GMT Master 2. And you come to learn the way the case in its purest form should look, how the bevels should look, how the lines look, how the chamfering looks. And how do you do that? Well, you can look at pictures. The more close-up pictures you can find, the better. And if you live in a big city, you can also find new old stock pieces to learn from. So if you live in Tokyo or New York, one of these big cities, you're going to find 5-digit, for example, new old stock pieces. They'll probably be out of your price range, but that's okay. You're not looking to buy them. You're looking to, educate yourself. And so look at the piece, use a loop, and study the lines. And that's what you want to remember. I mean, this is sort of your watch's ideal. And so try to remember the lines you're looking at, because going forward when you're looking at those used pieces, how similar it is to that ideal, that new old stock piece. All right, so let's talk about this for a second. This is a loop. You're definitely going to want to use a loop. This is a 10 times loop. I have a 20 times loop. It's basically worthless because you have to get so close it blocks out all the light, and sometimes if you're looking at the dial, you can't even get close enough because the sapphire crystal gets in the way, and so you can't even get close enough to sort of pull focus, and so that's virtually worthless to me. 10 times is much better. Maybe a 15 times would be a good one. I might try that one next, but this is the best. And assuming you know the case the way it should look, and you have this, you can get an idea whether a piece is polished or not. But even if you don't, like if you give me a Speedmaster, I don't know what a Speedmaster really is supposed to look like, but what would I do? Well, I would look at the lugs and I would see how symmetrical they are. So I'd look at each four lug and look at each side, and am I seeing balance there? As one is, am I seeing lines that are different on one side and that's what I would look for. And if I can pull up this polished Hydronaut 89190, well, I knew that this was a polished piece. I could tell from the picture when I was shopping for it, and I could tell because you could see where the polishing brush had hit. I know you guys can't see it, but I could in the picture. It had just gone a little over the point where it was supposed to. All right, Tudor or Rolex never would have done that. It would have been perfect. So I knew it had a third-party polish, and that's one thing I should bring up right now: third-party polish versus, say, a Rolex polish. Well, if third-party polishes, I mean, if you've ever seen them do it, it's pretty cringy. They sort of eyeball it, and once they are finished, from a distance, I'm sure it looks perfect. I mean, you can't see a scratch on it, right? But if you get your loop up there, you're going to realize that you can't eyeball it and maintain that balance, okay? And so Rolex apparently uses a machine where they secure the watch and they're able to pretty much do a perfect polish. So if you are presenting me with a watch that has been polished through Rolex once or twice, I likely wouldn't be able to even tell you if it's polished or not, because they do such a perfect job. But the third parties don't, and so that's why I'm really against third party polishes, and that's why third party polishes are really sort of easy to ID, because there's this lack of balance, even if you're unfamiliar with the case shape of the watch in question. All right, so practice. Get out your loop and just sort of shop around. Hit the shops. Look at new old stock pieces. That's probably the best thing, and you'll develop sort of an eye for it. I'm a one-trick pony. 5-digit steel professional model watches. You give me anything else, and I'm going to start having to really just look at the balance and little telltale signs like stray marks from the polishing wheel. All right, he writes, does it lower the value of the watch? Well, this is an interesting question, and I go back to my continuum: the persnickety people like me and the casual people. Well, for some people, polishing adds value to it. I mean, they don't have to service the watch. It looks new. For me, it devalues the watch because it looks new, but the lines aren't what they're supposed to look like. You can't go back. You can't. It's never going to be new old stock again. Once you polish it, it will look new old stock. It will look new, right? But to the trained eye, to the persnickety collector, it can never go back. And so that's why, ideally new, right? Or new old stock. But again, that's sort of an impossibility with vintage. So I look for, the best unpolished example that I can find. And again, if I want to polish it, I can. But again, once it's polished, it's de-virginized, it's deflowered. You can't go back. And so I much rather have sort of a, I don't want a trashed piece, but a piece that has seen some use and has a little bit of history on it, I think is kind of cool, to be honest. But it's unpolished. It's virginal, and you can still see those chamfers and the beveling and whatnot. And so for me, that is what brings value. The closest I can get to new, right? And the furthest from new to me is unpolished. But again, some people, it looks new, and if it looks new, it's good enough, right? And for those people, it will add value. So it really depends on who you're asking. Should we stay away from them, or just be aware to make a knowledgeable purchasing decision? The latter, the knowledgeable purchasing decision. Because, when I got my P serial GMT, I, happened to get a non-polished piece, but I was okay with a polished piece because that was going to be a usable, just sort of everyday piece for me. And I wasn't looking at it like a collector or as a safe queen piece. And so I just wanted something that I could use. And the same thing goes for this here. I mean, I knew going to the store to look at it that it had been polished. And I was okay because this was the usable hydronaut. And so, yes, I just want people to be aware of it and come to at least appreciate the idea of, say, a non-polished virginal piece. All right, and he says, is it worth paying less for a polished watch? Yeah, it could be, and especially if it's a watch that you're going to use anyway, and you're going to put dings on it, and you're going to use it throughout the years, and maybe you want to have it polished at some point. And so yeah, it's sort of your decision there. But for me, here in Japan, let me just kind of break off. I know I was in the middle of the sentence there, but let me just sort of go off on this small tangent and just say, here in Japan, used looking things are not popular. All right. And in fact, used things are just not popular, period. Japanese are coming around to the idea of used vintage Rolexes. Believe me when I say that. But as far as, cars and used things, it's just not that kind of culture. And while they're coming around to the idea of vintage Rolexes, they're coming around something fierce, let me tell you. They still like a watch that looks new, all right? And for that reason, most watch shops will third-party polish their watches. And it, I think is terrible. They see value in it. They will charge more for those pieces, okay? And I come and I look at them and I say, I want to pay you less for that piece because you polished it, you ruined it, all right? To them, is giving value. To me, is taking away value. So what I look for is the cheaper pieces that they say, well, it hadn't been polished yet. We haven't sent it to do anything. Let's just tack on a lower price and see if somebody wants this sort of used looking piece. That's what I want. That's what I want. So actually, it kind of works out sometimes because again, those unpolished pieces, they don't see value in. I do. They price them a little bit lower. Good for me. All right. So yes. All right. Well, anyway, I mean, I don't think anybody should get hung up too much on polishing, but I do think in a way it's one of the things that you really should be aware of. And, if nothing else, it brings great enjoyment, understanding this aspect of the watch. When you use your loupe to look at the dial, it's like looking at a painting. I've made a video about this where you just enjoy the details, and it's like being at a museum, and you'll see people at museums just stare for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes at a painting. Well, I feel like I can do the same thing with the dial on a watch, and a loupe allows you to do that, and it's an aspect of the appreciation. Well, the dial is like the painting, but the case is like a sculpture, and there's that much enjoyment to be had looking at the details of a case. So I get great enjoyment taking out my loupe and looking at my polished Explorer 2 that had a third-party polish, and finding the faults and the differences between the sides and the camphor that you can kind of see there, but has disappeared on that side. It's interesting. It's like you're seeing. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. If you're a watch person, maybe you understand where I'm coming from. But so even if you are not so vexed by the idea of a polished watch, it brings another level of aesthetic enjoyment to watches. And so there you go. Good luck, Paul. And I think everybody should be aware. What do you think of polished watches, non-polished watches, on this continuum of persnickety collector, or sort of casual, hey, if it looks beautiful, it's good enough for me. It looks like a beautiful piece, I'll go with it. Where do you fall on there? All right, I'm pretty much on the persnickety collector side, or am I? Hey, I don't mind a good-looking, usable, polished piece. So maybe it depends on the piece in question. But thanks for your question again, Paul. And if you have a question for me, check out the description of this video, and you can see how you can make it happen. All right, take care. Thanks for watching. See you next time.